Do you think sometimes we miss the signs and because of that, we don't necessarily take it upon ourselves to do the work required to come out of those situations?
Absolutely. I think that sometimes it's fearful. For me as a mom, I didn't come out of that situation. I stayed in the situation that I was in because I had 6 kids. And if I was to leave those situations, then maybe by chance he was going to have my children every other weekend and one day a week. I wasn't willing to do that. I was willing to take the abuse for him not to have my children, in any situation. When you are in an abusive situation, a lot of times you don't have the money. And we know that people are only going to help other people for like 3 weeks. After a death happens, you're around that person that has to be comforted about 3 weeks, and then you move on to your own lives. Sometimes there's no place for women to go, and they know that. And they know that they're going to feel like a burden, because there is going to be a moment that they are going to be a burden, because we can, as people, we can only help for so long, and then our brains aren't capable anymore. There are so many reasons. I'm a born again Christian. I would go to prayer meetings and they'd say, Bambi, make a pie. Make a pie for him that evening, because maybe if you make a pie, his favorite pie, he's going to be okay with you. I was told, in those situations, I was told continue to be intimate with him, because that's spiritual warfare. I'm being abused, but I'm supposed to do this. And I think that now things are changing. Things are changing within the church. They're realizing that there is so much abuse within the church, and that people are now starting to advocate, for us. But it's scary. It's scary because an abuser, a narcissistic abuser, he tells you somewhat the truth. And you're like, oh, I did do that. But he twists it in a way that you're doubting yourself all the time. So you just have to know the signs, and you just have to know and believe and stand upon yourself, and not. I think that sometimes women get caught up in the abuse, because then they become a victim, and then they don't have to then look at themselves outside of the abuse, because the abuse is the elephant in the room. But when you take the elephant out of the room, now you have to deal with yourself. You have to deal with your own heart issues. And sometimes it's very difficult, because you don't get the same kind of sympathy as you would when you're in an abusive situation.
Yes, there's some people that once they take themselves out of that situation, they don't do any self-reflection because for some people, it's easier to tell that story, like the victim story. And there's people out there that unfortunately they seek that out because that's all that they know. They think it's normal for me to go from an abusive partner to another abusive partner to another abusive partner, not knowing that if that is your track record and you're not healed, eventually, and this is where it's a bit unfortunate, sooner than later, you're going to meet someone who isn't like your previous abusive partners. And you're going to bring chaos into their lives, and then you're going to abuse them
Yes.
in a type of way. Have you seen that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And because we become people of the condition of our hearts. We think whatever your heart is, if your heart is broken, you're going to get yourself involved in broken people. And if you are broken, you're going to try to, instead of dealing with yourself, you're going to vomit on everybody else around you. And there comes a point that people are tired of wait getting the vomit off their faces, because, and I'm not saying that women are choosing to be abused. I didn't choose to be abused. I didn't choose to have somebody not value me. I didn't choose to have somebody, treat me the way that he treated me. But there were some characteristics, and there were some things that I did that I should have seen the signs and never walked into the situation. But because I thought that I could change the situation got worse. I sat down with his ex-wife, and she told me the abuse that he had done to her. And I still married him. I still saw things before we were dating But then I ended up getting pregnant, and I was afraid of what was going to happen if I didn't marry him. So I made some decisions based on my way of wanting to protect my babies, wanting to protect the situation, and then also the embarrassment. I married out of the embarrassment because I was a member of a church and I was teaching Sunday school. And so I married out of an embarrassment that I didn't want people to look at me like the woman with the 6 husbands, or the woman that was they were ready to stone her. So I made those decisions, and I stayed because I wanted to wait long enough for my sons to get old enough to be able to tell their own story. And because if I would have left early, he would have had my sons every other weekend and one day a week. And I wasn't willing to do that. So there were situations and there were decisions that I made that were not the right decisions. But because I felt like I made a decision, I had to pay the consequences of those decisions. But I was a victim of his abuse, but I was not a victim of the whole situation. I played a part in it.
That's an interesting take, and I will agree. I will agree that there's some people that are victims of someone's behavior, in this case, the abuse, the violence, the trauma, and then there's those same people that are a victim of their choices.
Yes.
And there's a lot of times where being a victim of your own choices will last longer in your life than you being a victim of the person's abuse, because you can escape that person or distance yourself from that person, but not a lot, but you can't escape yourself.
You
You
can't.
can't,
And then
right?
you have to look in the mirror. You have to begin to start looking in the mirror and seeing yourself for who you are, and see yourself with all the flaws, and admit those flaws, and admit those scars that some people gave to you and then you gave to yourself.